y'all, Ron here. Lately, I have been thinking about the effect that video games have had on my life. And to be completely honest, it is incredibly embarrassing how important video games were in my early childhood. I grew up on a farm in Ohio, and besides the corn, there isn't really anything going on up there. Video games provided me an escape from a monotonous farm life, and regardless if I was driving as Koopa Troopa in Mario Kart, playing through LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, or playing Pokemon Alpha Sapphire on my 2DS, video games always transported me to another world. Video games were an invaluable part of my childhood because of this, and they allowed me to experience what felt like at the time, these vast and imaginative worlds. And also they allowed me to feel like I was out of bumfuck nowhere, Ohio. However, there is one series that has achieved this feeling better than any other, and that is The Legend of Zelda. The Legend of Zelda may not have been my entry into gaming culture, but it eventually grew into one of the games that really developed my taste in video games. It is worthwhile to explain that I consider my childhood anything before I got my original Nintendo Switch. Everything that came after just did not catch my wonder, like all the video games of my childhood. Something about seeing in 1080p, or even in 4K for that matter, doesn't really leave the room for imagination, and then I grew up and wonder was just dead. However, I did grow up with technically three Zelda games during my childhood. I played Zelda 1 and Zelda Ocarina of Time on my 3DS, and technically, I played Breath of the Wild on the Wii U before I bought my Switch. So, technically, that was before my childhood joy was dead. Both Zelda 1 and Ocarina of Time were my first introductions to the Zelda series. I bought both games around the same time. I technically played Zelda 1 first, however, I did not finish the game until a couple years after I got my Switch. You see, that summer, I got a job mowing my grandparents' yard, and I had a whole $30 burning an absolute crater in my pocket. It has always been kind of funny to me that this is widely considered one of the worst Zelda games ever made. While there are definitely a few that are probably stinkier than this one is, it's hard to argue that this game is really all that bad. There's this imaginary concept that Nintendo never releases bad games, and if I hear you say this, I already know that you have them red and white colored glasses on that makes you feel like you need to defend Nintendo, a multi-billion-dollar company, for charging you $10 for a tech demo on the Switch 2. Now, will I be buying this $10 tech demo? Absolutely, but I won't be happy about it. However, I'll give it to Nintendo. The Zelda series is consistently a high-quality experience, and this game is no different. In fact, I believe that this game is one of the few NES games that has held up to time. Most NES games have aged like absolute milk. Have you played Clu Clu Land or NES Baseball recently? They absolutely blow. However, this is one of like 10 NES games that have aged like water. Hear me out. It might be stale, it might be a little gross, but it's probably safe to drink. While I'll repeat, this is not my favorite game in the series, it was one of the first Zelda games that I ever played. My main criticism for this game is how hard it is to actually navigate it. Even the first task that most players will do is not inherently obvious. You're supposed to enter this cave and get the basic sword. However, besides the super basic thought that most people will eventually go into this cave because they're tired of getting killed by enemies, this isn't an obvious step. I mean, listen, when I think of caves, I think of scary things that will kill you, not kind old men that give you essential gifts for your journey. Speaking of old men, here comes one now. What the f***? This game is incredibly confusing throughout the entire playthrough. To get into several essential parts of the game, you need to do seemingly illogical steps of gameplay to achieve mandatory steps of the story. However, this is mostly a complaint about the general overworld and not necessarily over the dungeons, which are the main draw to the game, where the overworld will have you burn down a random bush to acquire an essential item, or have you play a flute in front of a random lake to get into the next dungeon. When you're exploring the dungeons of this game, it can feel pretty intuitive, all things considered, or at least as intuitive as an NES game can feel. I remember being a kid and playing the Virtual Console version on my 3DS, and I played through about half the dungeons without a guide. Keep in mind that I never actually beat the game when I was a kid because it was too damn confusing. There are a few dungeons in this game that I can still remember as a kid, I could just not figure it out. For instance, the section with the Dodongo, I couldn't figure out how to beat him even with the tip from the monk. I do not care who you are. It is not obvious to throw bombs in the mouth of dinosaurs, even with this hint. I kept going around just blowing up the bombs near him because he doesn't like smoke, So that must mean he must be weak to bombs, right? But no! You need to somehow get it into his mouth. How was I supposed to know this as a 12-year-old? I never said I was a smart kid. In general, I do find this game to be really appealing once I found out all its little quirks. Plus, it also helped that I found out how to look up Zelda Dungeon. Yeah, when I was a kid, I was really stupid and I did not try to look up an online guide. Well, it was true that I wasn't allowed on the internet until I was like 13. Yes, I know I'm weird for a kid from my generation. Thinking back on it, I had plenty of opportunities to look up a guide and save it. But for some reason, I never thought to do this. I thought you needed to buy the physical guide from GameStop if you wanted help to beat a game. I don't know why, but I thought it was illegal to post gameplay tips online. It wasn't until the twilight of my childhood that I even found YouTube Let's Plays that guided me through the game, and eventually that did lead me to Zelda Dungeon. But I really didn't use it on this game until way into my teenage years, because I just didn't really want to return to it. The gameplay is simplistic, however, I don't think that's a bad thing. The combat is definitely primitive for today's standards, but I can still find charm in its simplicity. There are even some mainstays in the game, like bombs and arrows and boomerangs and the sword beam that were all introduced in this game. The puzzles, when they are solvable, are genuinely fun, and I do believe that this game really set the standard for the series. However, I will say that the puzzles are exactly where some of the bullshit will pop up. There are so many puzzles or secrets that are just illogical. Some claim that this gave the game charm back in the day, but let's be real. It's just bad game design. While the art style is simplistic, I actually think it's really cute and has similar charm to the original Mario Bros. Or Mario Bros. 3 on the same console. I've always liked the art style for this game, and I mean, I am definitely biased. But I believe that this game holds up much better today than most other NES games. This game's entire theme is it's okay. It's not all that great, it's not all that bad, but it's about in the middle. If I was an investor for Nintendo back in the day, I would not have had the foresight to predict that this was going to be one of Nintendo's largest games in the future. I will say that this is literally the definition of the middle of the road though. However, I don't think that's a bad thing for the Legend of Zelda series. For one of your worst games in a series being a pretty middle-of-the-road game from back in the 80s, with its sequel and some random 3DS multiplayer game being the only two that are widely considered worse, I think that is objectively a sign of a really strong series. This game is definitely playable and really enjoyable with a light use of a guide when things are just not making sense. I beat this game on a car ride back in 2019 on my original Switch. Bastron here, he was not aware of the horrors that were about to take place. To be completely honest, I wouldn't have it any other way. I started and finished this game on a portable console on a car ride, and I think that fits its theme incredibly well. When I got to the end screen that said that you were the hero of Hyrule, that meant so much to me at the time. I felt like I overcame one of objectively the hardest games in the series. And I finally finished a journey that I started 6 years prior, that took me through both the end of the game and my transition into my teenage years. Well, that was fun. I love taking a trip down memory lane. Wait! I'm getting a precognition from the future. Well, young yippersnapper, you're about to have an intense feeling of regret in approximately 30 minutes. Maybe I shouldn't have eaten that taco.